Thank you. It's such an honour to be here at this inaugural conference, and it's a real honour for me to share, I guess, the learnings of my journey, our journey of the AIS with FTEM. So FTEM is our Athlete Development Framework. It stands for Foundation, Talent, Elite and Mastery. So it's been quite a learning journey, and we're quite comfortable with that, with its origins in 2011. But what I wanted to do before I went into the nuances, of this Athlete Development Framework is really set the scene as to where we were in Australia in terms of the athlete pathway prior to 2011. And we were at a real predicament. We had a really quite unhealthy athlete pathway. And when you consider the major phases there of foundation, pre-elite and elite and mastery, there was a lack of connect and alignment, of those macro phases. But we could see that there was real compelling issues that were constraining, the foundational levels, the critical feeder into the high performance pathways. So very strong evidence about marked declines in physical literacy of children in Australia. Also limited parental education support. We know they're a critical stakeholder, but there was lacking in terms of education support of parents to promote fundamental movement skills and physical literacy. There was a decline in deliberate play and sport sampling, and conversely an increase in structured sport formats and early specialisation. And then also importantly, there was over-reliance on volunteer coaches in the foundational levels, but these coaches doing their very best but having limited understanding, of the impact of maturation on athlete development and about holistic athlete development and about injury prevention. At the pre-elite levels, there was quite a lot of evidence of questionable TID practice, where there wasn't a holistic approach adopted, more a reliance on juvenile performance, and we know that that's a very poor correlate, of senior success. There were monodisciplinary look at TID, so focus on more physicality rather than looking at the holistic profile. In terms of development, there's questionable case management of athletes and poor athlete monitoring. There were non-ecological training practices where training was not a fit, with the performance context. There was mismanagement of training loads. That still continues to be a big issue, where there's poor balance of training loads leading to injury and drop out of our very finest pre-elite athletes. There was poor awareness of the ecosystem and the impacts of peers are highly influential on young cohorts, and also about having the right sport-life balance, and also a lack of preemptive strategies to promote transition up to the senior elite levels. At the very top of the pathway, at the elite and mastery level, Australia were very good at getting athletes up and getting the tracksuit and representing Australia internationally, but such a limited number going on and actually getting podium success, and then a fewer number again doing that over consecutive high performance cycles. There was poor transition out of sport, so a lack of readiness of these athletes transitioning out or even retaining them in sport, considering the considerable investment that sports had provided for those athletes. And for me, the underutilisation of the athlete's voice. Athletes that get to the podium level have lived the experience and are so valuable as a source of information to help with the review and refinement of strategy. When we looked at the impact of that on an individual level, we could see that there was real constraints in terms of athlete profiling, particularly for foundational pre-elite athletes. So we could see that they were compromised in terms of their psychological skills, in terms of their physical capability, their coordinative profiling, and their neuromuscular capability and robustness. There were limits to their synchrony and their robustness and adaptability of the sport-specific skills. And what I mean by that is the synchrony of technical or motor skills and perceptual skills and cognitive skills all working together to get a favourable outcome. And then finally, the athletes were making poor decisions. They had issues with sport-life balance and upholding, Olympic values. This is all culminating in limited physical literacy of our pre-elite athletes, unfulfilled talent potential because of this compromised profile, burnout, injury and dropout. So the solution for us in 2011, when we first came together and we're faced with putting a framework together that spanned the whole athlete pathway, we realised that we really needed to foster a better coordination and alignment of the whole athlete pathway, and that's how FTEM came about. So it really is a practicable, strategic framework that really corrals and coordinates and aligns all the critical stakeholders to enhance the athlete pathway, from foundation very early on all the way up to elite and mastery levels. It's inclusive in terms of it presenting on the left, active lifestyle, so lifelong engagement in active lifestyle, also recreational sport, but also importantly, the high performance pathway as well. It's fully integrated and differentiated, so we squabbled, the original team about how many levels we should have, in each macro phase. So I'll give you a bit more insight in that in a sec, but they're very deliberate, the F phases, the T phases and the E and M phases, to really promote logical, progressive development. They're a real complement of strategies. It's deliberately not age prescriptive, so we learnt from LTAD where it's quite age chronological and very prescriptive in terms of training and competition ratios. We knew from our research that there's great variability of age. If you think of early specialising sport and late specialising sport and talent transfer, it's not a fit, to have age prescription. It's non-linear and flexible and allows for dropout and athletes being deselected and then coming back in as well. It's inclusive, so we use it with Paralympic sports as well as able-bodied sports. And it's also quite holistic and multidimensional in its philosophy as well. I was very fortunate to present alongside Professor Chia at the IOC, and I did present on FTEM. It was considered an example of an inclusive, flexible sort of framework that promoted athlete development. It's a direct fit with our participation strategies in the Australian Sports Commission, so our Play Sport Australia mantra, and also Australia's Winning Edge high performance strategy from 2012 to 2022. So it's a direct fit with both participation strategies across the Australian system, but also high performance as well. And I'm happy to say that the majority of national sporting organisations within Australia are actually adopting FTEM. Cricket Australia was an early adopter, and if you look at their website, they've actually depicted FTEM like a cricket pitch, which is fantastic. And they have curriculum assigned to that, for athletes and coaches that are specific to each developmental level. So while FTEM is really a strategic overarching framework to really promote alignment across the whole Australian sporting system, we use 3DAD, so that's our three-dimensional athlete development model, to really understand and learn from our athletes what's the right complement of athlete factors, environmental support and system context. And we know from learning from our very best athletes that we engage their voice, we know that it's a very integrated and very multidimensional and very chaotic and individualistic journey. So 3DAD has been very powerful in educating, stakeholders to this effect. So what I'm going to do now is actually draw on some of the research that we found from learning from our podium level athletes, specific to foundational, pre-elite and elite and mastery, related to our best practice principles for FTEM, and then talk very briefly about some of the strategies that we've got at those levels. At the F levels, when we've spoken to, or we've actually, through our My Sporting Journey questionnaire, where we have over 1,000 respondents, we've learnt from our podium level athletes about their favourable foundations, and we've found some commonalities. We found that there's very strong family ties. So as Ty touched on, that parents and siblings are critical. Commonly they've done the journey before and to a very high level. They really value sport, and what we found interesting too, of our podium level athletes they commonly were the younger born, so they had that advantage as well. They had a high investment in deliberate play, so play in the backyard and in the neighbourhood with their siblings, with their friends. One of the biggest findings from My Sporting Journey questionnaire was our podium female athletes had done a lot of deliberate play with boys, friends, siblings, and they actually attributed that highly to where they got to of their developmental journey. They had a lot of sport sampling, they had the right competition exposure, so they weren't restricted to age competition. They were allowed to progress and go up a few rungs in terms of ages when it was appropriate, when they were ready psychologically and skill-wise. They had early tastes of success, but they had a very strong self-belief, in their perceived competencies, their sport-specific skills, which is really interesting. So this has then culminated into what we advocate to all stakeholders in terms of what is best practice according to FTEM. So at the F1 level, it's all about getting all the stakeholders together, educating and implementing effective strategies to promote early fundamental movement skills. So parents are a critical stakeholder in here, and also early childhood educators. At the F2 level, it's then about refining those early fundamental movement skills into stronger physical literacy. And how we go about that is promoting the complement of age-modified formats of sport, so those sport formats that are appropriate to the age and skill development of the child, but also, importantly, deliberate play as well. At the F3 level, it's about educating, implementing and coordinating united and holistic strategies that promote lifelong physical literacy. So FTEM's about early foundations, but also here at the masters level, the older athletes as well. Relating it to some of the strategies we've got at the moment, so FTEM and those best practice principles are feeding into the Play Sport Australia, so our review and refinement of national sporting organisations' participation programs. Also, it's informing our Sporting Schools program, which is a specific type of sampling age-modified sport formats for children through the school hours. And I've actually had some involvement with the refining of the Cricket Australia Milo into Cricket product. But then also, I've had a crack at putting top 10 tips together for parents. So I'm a parent myself, that's me up there with my two little boys. So I've learnt, as a parent, as to how to best promote, their early sport development. So we've got this top 10 tips on our website, and we're actually putting some podcasts together, one a week that covers and listen to the podcasts. In terms of the pre-elite levels, what we've learnt from our very, very best athletes is that it indeed takes a holistic athlete profile to get to the very top. The psychosocial elements are just as important as the physical and the sport-specific skills to endure what can be quite a tricky journey, up that pathway, in and out. Self-regulation is the key skill that we're finding with our research really differentiates those athletes that do make it. Dual career and transitional success, having strong self-regulation really assists with that, those aspects as well. Load management's a critical one, as I touched on, about balancing load, training load to reduce injury. And also up the top, and Ty talked about it, the criticality of having the right match of coach with athlete. It really is about finding coaching talent and really nurturing and building around that coaching talent. So in terms of pre-elite best practice, according to FTEM, based on that research and what we think is global best practice, T1 and T2, we're very deliberate in having those two together. T1 is about the initial snapshot of talent, but importantly T2 is about confirming that talent in training and competition, and doing that in a holistic way, looking at coachability, psychosocial aspects, technical, sport-specific skills and so forth. That is really critical. We think this is a real advance in terms of enhancing predictive power of TID. Also, we push for sophistication of talent ID. You need to have separate strategies for talent selection and talent transfer, and we've certainly learnt a lot about that with our direct delivery of talent transfer programs. At the T3 level, it's about building the right ecosystem. I love that term, it's so critical, and having the right athlete case management and having deliberate programming. It's really, really key. And then T4, it's about the springboard, the exposure and the breakthrough of an athlete to really signal that they're ready, for the senior elite levels, and how we best facilitate that. So we've learnt, through our direct delivery of talent transfer programs, so the AIS Sports Draft, but also working with national sporting organisations like Gymnastics Australia, which is a fantastic exemplar. So we've learnt about the importance, particularly as Ty touched on, finding the right coach talent, and then building the right developmental environments about that, and then fitting, the athlete to that match. That's really, really key. We've got a new initiative that we launched last week. It's an online platform called My AIS Basecamp. We know that we need to do a better job in terms of education of pre-elite athletes across Australia, and in terms of promoting also their physical capability and their physical literacy. So this is an exciting program for us, where we've got the best brains in the business from the AIS that have contributed and put together some education modules for athletes. And then finally, we work with personal excellence that really help promote flexible delivery of academia and vocation, and getting the right balance of dual career. And then to get to the very top, our learnings from our podium level athletes, it is all about brain power. They've got that facilitative psychological profile, strong self-regulation, great performance strategies, great coping skills, phenomenal resilience, because it's a rocky road, as all my speakers have spoken about. It's chaotic, there's dips and peaks, so that's critical. There's so many stressors that they need to negotiate effectively, get the right sport-life balance, but they need to have that intrinsic motivator. Having the hunger drives them, gets them through. Having the right support team's important too. So you don't do the journey on your own, but having role models and mentors and the right coach and the family is critical as well. And we're learning from our mastery level athletes, those perennial podium level athletes, about how they economise and they reinvent themselves, and they're innovative to be able to continue, to podium. So in terms of best practice, according to FTEM, at the E1 level, it's all about better preparing and exposing, our first-time senior international level athletes, so that they are prepared. They're not daunted by the experience, but they want to come back, and they've got the hunger to come back. And for E2 and M, it's about, progression and maintenance. It's about reinvention. It's about innovation and economising. It's about engaging their athlete's voice. They're such a critical commodity. I think not enough is done to listen to athletes, what really resonates and what's really important to them. And, your podium level athletes are such a critical resource, and they're so valuable. And preparing for life after sport. So I guess I was very impacted by going to the IOC and listening to Gary Hall Jr. He opened up the proceedings, and he talked about his experiences as an athlete, and that really impacted on me. And, it's just great for us to now engage, the athlete's voice of our very best athletes. And that's me there with Anna Mears, who is a perennial podium level athlete for Australia. Now, engaging, getting the athlete's perspective on what works and what doesn't work, what could be done better, for athletes coming through the ranks. We're getting that in terms of through the My Sporting Journey questionnaire. We're getting sport-specific insight that we're giving to national sporting organisations. It can be quite daunting, quite confronting, the evidence that they see, but they're really valuing that insight. It's also informing our strategy, our long-term blueprints that we're putting together utilising FTEM for our national sporting organisations, and we call that a National Athlete Pathway Framework, and I'm happy to talk a bit about that later in the breakout session. And it's also, I guess this is a journey that, you know, it's a long journey, you know, it's only just the start. We're learning, we're taking an action research approach and really evolving to make sure that what we're doing is really meaningful, you know, for the athletes and the coaches and the stakeholders. So it's about effective communication, effective education, effective implementation, but also looking at the impact, you know, of FTEM as well. So the take-home messages, and I'm a little bit over time, I hope that's okay. So in terms of talent, and I think they're fantastic themes that you've proposed. So for me, it's about healthy foundations. You know, that's a critical feeder into the high-performance pathway. It's about addressing this issue in terms of decline in physical literacy. It's a major, major issue. It's about the connected pathway, promoting, allowing your gifted movers and giving them opportunity to go up the high-performance pathway. It's about being holistic and inclusive. Considering maturation and the impact of that, interpreting and negotiating that. It's about being sophisticated, as I said, having different strategies for talent transfer and talent selection. Timing, we know that FTEM's a good fit because we know there's such inherent variability. So you're better off taking that best practice approach. And it's all about being preemptive and providing adaptive, holistic athlete support. And in terms of tenacity, the psychological attributes are key. How you best nurture that is important. Having the right support team and exposure and experience is really critical. So look, thank you very much. Look forward to our breakout sessions. Thank you.